Today I'm in conversation with Grant, who is an international secondary school teacher. And Grant, you teach English language and English literature and film studies. And I'm delighted to have you here on the podcast with me today. Thank you very much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And I wanted to talk to you because you presently live in Malaysia, and I have only been to Kuala Lumpur, so I'm very interested in hearing more about Malaysia. But you are what I risk calling a serial mover. You moved out of the UK a long time ago, and you've lived in a number of different countries. So I wanted to talk a little bit about this, if I may.
Right. I left the UK in 2007, ostensibly to have a short sabbatical. So I did an ESL course and went to Paris, as sort of many people do, just to teach some English. And I mean, it didn't last long. I got fairly bored with it. But from there, somebody said, well, you could go to do this in Saudi Arabia. So really naively, I started teaching as an ESL teacher in Saudi Arabia, in Riyadh. And that was quite a tough introduction to classroom teaching, because I started with 3 other teachers, and after 4 months, I was the only one left. So I lasted my contract, which was 18 months in Saudi. And from there, a colleague who I'd worked with said, well, you should go, and because I had a master's in film studies, that was always kind of the thing I was interested in. And he said, go to teaching at the international schools in China. You can do that. So I applied for a job and got a job in China, and I was there for 11 years. So, and then I left 3 or 4 years ago to come here. So that's my history.
Yes. So it's interesting that you say it sounds like the initial one was almost a whim and a temporary idea. And from that, it developed into what has shaped your life.
It shaped my middle age, yeah. It did start out not as a whim, as a sort of I think probably lots of you get to 40, or you get to the wrong side of 40, and you start thinking, cool, I really need to sort of try something new. And that's kind of those very, I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I had done my master's in Poland, so that's the only experience I'd had of being abroad and living abroad for a long period of time, and I really enjoyed it. It's really refreshing, sort of being an outsider and seeing everything with an outsider's eye. So I liked that, and so when I got the other side of 40, I sort of thought, I should try that again, because it's just sort of like getting out and getting back on the road again. Because I think I enjoy that kind of like being a bit of a stray cat, what he describes. Yes. I like being an outsider in a foreign kind of community and culture, and Malaysia is a very kind of really interesting. It's even though sort of about 35% of the population have Chinese heritage, it's completely its own invention, Malaysia, and very different from China. So so those are the kind of Asian countries. Even though I've traveled all over Asia, these are the countries that I've spent a long period of time in.
And when you lived in China, did you live in one city only, or did you move around the provinces and work in the different international schools?
No, I started out, I went to Chengdu, which is the west of China, really sort of the city that's nearest the foothills of the Himalayas. So I did 3 years there at a kind of very young, small international school, which was actually a wing of a big sort of Chinese private school, and they had a little international wing. So I did 3 years there, and then kind of stupidly, for me, people tell you, oh, you need to go to a bigger, better school. So you kind of look around and you look at Beijing and Shanghai, and I was offered a job in Beijing, so I thought, oh well, I should go there. So I went there, and I did not enjoy it at all. I knew I'd made a mistake, and so I got out and went to Shanghai for 4 years. So I did the West Coast, Chengdu, went to Beijing for a year, down to Shanghai where I worked for 4 years, and then I got a job up in a city called Wuxi, which is about 90 miles north of Shanghai. So 4 cities in China. I worked in for fairly considerable amounts of time, except for Beijing.
Mm. And in the international schools, where there was the population of students literally international from all over the world, and did it include Chinese students?
It did include Chinese students, and quite a lot of I think maybe there were a few in Chengdu. There were a few international students, truly international students from different countries whose parents might be working there for international companies for short periods of time. But most of the students were Chinese students. But there was kind of like they had dodges. The parents had dodges where they would have their children abroad, so their child might be born in Canada or somewhere like that, and they would come back and they would have an international passport. So there were all sort of different kinds of dodges that the Chinese parents might use in order to get their children allowed into the international schools, and therefore the theory was that they would have a better chance of getting into an international university, which is what their target often was.
Oh, so you did have quite a big population of Chinese students.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I at all the schools I was at, there was a fair amount. I mean, Mandarin would be taught as a language and a B language at all the schools I taught at. The last school in Wuxi was probably the nearest to actually the first and the last schools were the nearest to true Chinese schools. A lot, most of the staff would be Chinese, and there would be perhaps a third or a quarter would be international staff from all the usual international English-speaking countries.
Thank you. It's amazing, given I'm talking about moving countries, to think how many young people move countries. And did that come up for you as something you had to cater to or take care of them for? In the sense that they've lived possibly in multiple countries and at least are not living in their own country. So was that something that you had to deal with?
Right. So in terms of your question, are you talking about the colleagues, or are you talking about younger colleagues, or are you talking about students?
I was talking about students. But you can also say it from the colleagues' perspective, because they're also in the same boat as you.
Colleagues is interesting. It's different. I mean, I would thought from the point of view of the students, you had I mean, depending on which the school was, for example, in Shanghai, I was at the Shanghai Singapore school, or on one of their 2 campuses, and so a lot of the students were genuine internationals, and they were Singaporeans. Their parents, lots and lots of Singaporean parents would be working in China. So those kinds of students have, I mean, there are lots of them, and they are bi and trilingual students. They do a bilingual international diploma. Kind of in some ways, I think it's quite disorientating for them, because most of us, like me, I grew up in a village in the north of England, and I did in the end go to a boarding school, but I went to sort of like 3 schools in my life. And when I was really small, and then I just went to 3 schools. Whereas lots of these students that I teach, they come and go, and they might go to attend schools in 5 different countries. They might stay at our school for 2 years, and then they go on to another school. If parents might be in the military or something like that, and the kids go where the parents are posted, and that applies to lots of parents. So the students really are quite they're in many ways quite used to this kind of international lifestyle. But you're right, it is very unusual.
Mm. And I would say potentially quite disruptive for them, because you might get used to your group of friends and your environment, and then you have to up sticks and move somewhere else.
Yeah, but you'd be amazed at how quickly. I had a group of three Chinese girls who started last year, and when they started, they quickly kind of clung together for 2 or 3 months, and then very quickly they assimilate and they see who their new friends are, and probably within a year they're back to a normal life. Even though it is for a few months with teenagers, they're a little bit tentative about integrating with each other. But after that, that's the other thing. You with something like integration, international school is very good for bringing everybody together. And the English is the standard language, but it's not the only language. In my classroom, the Mandarin is spoken. If two Mandarin speakers and it's their first language are sitting next to each other, they'll speak in Mandarin. You can't stop them. So international schools are great like that. If you attend one, you immediately get kind of brought into this international kind of community, and it's fascinating. It must be fascinating for them.
Yes, and it must give them an extraordinary outlook on life.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, I'm a bit old now, and so I remember what it was like at school, and we were what's the word? It was pretty. We were outdated. We were quite dated. We were really, frankly, in many of our attitudes, we were a bit Neanderthal. And students now, I are really kind of like much more kind of. They're much more kind of sympathetic to people who are sort of different to them, and I didn't grow up with that kind of fantastic kind of multi-ethnic kind of mix and a mix of languages and all that kind of thing. I remember, that when first you were thrown into an environment where people were speaking other languages, you were kind of like, it made you feel kind of unsure and insecure. I remember that's my first sort of feelings, when I went abroad for a long period of time. But that's just stupid. It's fantastic to hear sort of different languages everywhere.
Yeah, and it's interesting that they get the opportunity to almost naturally embrace different perspectives, different cultures, different languages, different everything.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's different depending on which country you're in. I mean, a country like Malaysia is really, it's fascinating just because it is made up of lots of different sort of ethnic groups, but the three key kind of ethnic groupings have to sort of coexist. And Malaysia, that's what Malaysia's national identity is. It's a mix of cultures. Whereas I think it's much more difficult when you're living and working in China to see the complex Chinese ethnic makeup, because I'm not really a Mandarin speaker. I've picked up a little bit, but you're very much kind of like shut out of Chinese kind of society. You very much remain a bit of an outsider, whereas Malaysia, you're very much kind of welcomed, I would say.
Yeah, you're in the melting pot.
Yeah, absolutely. And Malaysia is very much a melting pot.
Mm.
Mm,
And just for the benefit of our listeners and a reminder to
mm,
me, because my
mm,
mind is being rusty right now, because it's
mm.
quite a while since I was in Kuala Lumpur. What are the three main ethnic
Yeah,
groups?
right. So the uh, broadly it would be now. I won't get my percentages exactly right,
No, no,
but
no.
something like 45% would be the Malay community, and that would it would be broadly Islamic. Then you would have about 35-ish% would be the Chinese or Chinese ethnic uh, grouping who very much see themselves as uh, Malay people, and then you've got the Indian group as well,
Mm,
and so these three, broadly, these three, and there are other
of course.
sort of groupings as well, but those would be the main three that
Yeah.
are kind of like um, sort of tied together.
And it has a strong mesh of religions as well, doesn't it? Because there are different religions in Malaysia, and and they
Yeah,
all
look, I
seem to
don't know.
coincide from my looking in.
Mm.
Um, I mean, it's quite a peaceful country, and it seems I've always felt it's a country where people coexist rather than there's tons of tension. But maybe I'm wrong because I'm
Yeah,
literally a tourist looking in when I've been there.
okay. I mean, there was. I think part of the Malaysian, we have to be a bit careful here because I'm no Malaysian historian, but there in 1969, famously there was some kind of interracial kind of riots, and this was quite a famous event, I think, in Malaysian modern history, and I think that as a result of that, they very much politicians and sort of public leaders decided that they needed to take a lot of steps in order to sort of solidify the national identity and to
Mm,
bring the groups together. So Malaysia has had its has had kind of historically it's had tensions,
mm,
but that's I certainly, as an outsider, don't see that now. It's a tremendously friendly country, and I would say that one of the reasons I moved here was that I was on a training workshop in Kuala Lumpur when I was still had a couple of years to go in China, and I was in a taxi in KL, and I said to that, I remember saying to the taxi driver, who was a Muslim lady, she said, I said, "Yeah, you seem to be so happy in KL in Malaysia. Are you happy people in Malaysia?" And she said, "Oh yes, we are happy. We're happy people here. We like it." And I just sort of remember there were so few sort of taxi drivers and perhaps people in some of the countries that I've lived in who would actually turn around to a passenger and say, yeah, this is a great place. This is a great place to live.
mm.
And she meant it. So,
Yeah,
I think broadly she was right.
absolutely. When I go back to when I used to go to Malaysia for work reasons, the first times it was tourism later, but the first times were for work. And the colleagues I would interact with said exactly the same thing. They were
Yeah,
there was a contentment, and there wasn't a yearning to be somewhere else. And
yeah. I think that's broadly true. I mean, that people have their gripes and grumbles in Malaysia, but I don't know. It's I would say that generally people are uh, quite happy to be here.
mm,
Um, it,
and
yeah,
it makes
yeah,
for a welcoming environment. That's certainly what I've experienced every time. I've always felt, like you say, very welcomed.
yeah. I think that I don't know why, but it does feel like a very welcoming place. I mean, I've got a colleague who left Penang, where I am, to move down to KL. And the last conversation I had with him, he said it's even friendlier down here. So maybe it's KL because
Mm,
that's the really international city
mm,
in Malaysia. But there's quite a lot of I think Penang's quite, the island of the north of Malaysia. There's Penang Island is quite an international uh, place, and it's also quite, I would say, quite friendly and quite used to outsiders and foreigners and characters, kind of, coming through. But
mm,
but certainly KL, I think, has a reputation as being a really friendly place.
mm. Which is impressive for a big city. Um,
Yeah,
and how long have you lived in Penang?
right. This is the end of my fourth year.
Mm,
So I came over during in the height of COVID. So summer 2020, I left China and arrived here, 2 weeks of quarantine in KL, and then a car came and drove me up the motorway to Penang, and I crossed the bridge. So yeah, from then our school was the students were face to face for about 8 weeks, and then everything shut down again. And we all had that 2 years of being on these things, doing Zoom, and and then gradually things got back to normal. And but I certainly came here during the height of COVID.
mm.
Um, so yeah, that's where I started. It seems like a long time ago now, but I think it
Yeah,
all just really cleared up a couple of years ago, really.
yes. And when you look back, are you glad you had those years of the confined years in Malaysia? Are you glad you were there rather than China, or it wouldn't have made much difference?
I think it would have made a little bit of difference. I mean, I had 6 months of COVID in China, but the school I was at in China was one of the first, if not the first, school in China to reopen, and we were open again. And so we were about 300 or 400 miles from Wuhan, um, and and we were back open in I would say it was barely April. I think it was probably the end of March.
Mm,
We opened again, and the school ran. So we were kind of so you had the we were largely, I think we were still on Zoom, but I think we had maybe we had some some lockdowns, and then we were back out face to face. I can't exactly remember, but we got back and we had a long summer term
mm,
in my Chinese school, and I had sort of already sort of decided to leave before COVID hit. I think I was offered a job in Malaysia, and COVID hit about 2 weeks after I was offered a job. So
right,
it's kind of like, and you didn't know how at the time you didn't know how COVID was going to pan out.
of course.
You at first we were all joking that we might get an extra week off work. That's that in January. It was Chinese. No, it's Christmas sort of time, and we had a couple of weeks off because we're international school, and we were all joking that we thought we might get a week off extra off school. So how how stupid were we?
Yeah, what little did we all know. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
and then now, so I'm just thinking about Beijing because I used to live in Beijing and I
Mhm.
visited Shanghai.
Oh, yeah,
And it sounds like Beijing was your least favorite city of the Chinese cities to be in. So I'm just
yeah.
curious because this, just like in the states are very different. Each state is very different. China is very similar.
Mm,
Each province is very different with a very,
mm,
with a different vibe and sometimes a different language and so on. And
mm.
so which was your favorite location?
Haha. Um, I, my favorite location would be the first one, Chengdu.
Ah,
Chengdu is a fantastic place. It's a long way away from Beijing and the eastern coast, the centers of government. So it has a little bit of a reputation as a somebody compared it to me. Somebody said Chengdu's like Manchester in the UK. So it's Manchester is the city in the north of the UK that's got a bit of an attitude, and it's a bit you know, it's like we're not like, you know, bloody Southerners. And Chengdu is a bit like that. So we're not from the East Coast. We're not part of the establishment. And there's Chengdu had a bit. It had a fantastic sort of, or it has this fantastic sort of like tea house culture, and it's much more sort of laissez-faire. If yeah, as a city. So if I could go back anywhere to China, and I'd love to go back and work in China again, but I'm too old. Um, I'd go back to Chengdu. Chengdu is a fantastic, interesting, stimulating place to live and work.
And did you get to go and see the pandas while you were there?
Yeah, of course. So yeah, I did. Yeah, I haven't edited it together, but I took a little camcorder film, so I've still got all my rushes for that in a folder somewhere on a hard drive. So yeah, a group of teachers, we went to that, and it's great. I mean, you know, you think pandas are all just cuddly and they're just sort of lie on their backs and let you kind of like stroke them or something, but they're not. There's the big males are just look really kind of like they mean business. So it's fascinating. Yeah, great place to go. Great place to go. You know, but yeah, you have to go first thing in the morning, otherwise the crowds are just, you know, stifling, which is what we did. You go get yourself in there absolutely at dawn, as soon as they open the place up, and there they are.
And when you were there and you were making your film, did you get to see all the different ages of pandas? Was it a time of year that there were the tiny babies when they're pink, they're pink?
There was I can't remember the circumstance we saw that, but they were in they were in
incubators.
Kind of incubators. Yeah, there were two of them in incubators. I remember a member of staff coming out with a very young one, not one in an incubator, but we saw two in incubators, and then they brought another one out. And then, as I say, you can go to the big open enclosures, and there's these gigantic bears in there. But I mean, they thankfully they weren't too interested in you. But I've been told that some of the males could be quite aggressive. So and there doesn't appear to be any kind of like fencing to keep them away from you. So that's what I remember of it.
Very good.
Yeah, it's but great. I mean, absolutely great place to go. You know, it really exists, and the Chinese really take care of it, and it's that place outside China is something that they're really proud of. You know?
Yeah, and deservedly so. And when you think about, you said you're getting too old, which I'm sure is not the truth, but when you think from that perspective, how do you embrace your future? How do you look at your future plans? Do you plan to find another country that you're going to look to stay in, or do you plan to return to the UK, or do you not at this point think about it?
Oh, that's the conundrum for quite a number of sort of older colleagues that I know around sort of Penang and KL. So I enjoy the job, so I'm going to stay and work as long as somebody will have me. The question is when you get kind of a bit older and you have to start thinking about your sort of, you know, your medical needs and things like that, then you may feel more secure in your own home country. But I know that there are people who are very retired and they still live here. I mean, you know, Malaysia and other different countries have their own system of accommodating small groups of expats who want to retire and who've got enough money to retire. Because what they don't want to do in Malaysia is they don't want to be paying anything for you. They want you to be you know, contributing. Yeah, absolutely. So I know kind of a number of people who would like to stay here for a number of years beyond working. But I've still got a few years left. Yeah, I think.
I'm sure you have.
Yeah, I don't have any plans to to go back to the UK where I'm from. You know, I left the north of England, which is cold and often and rainy, and you know, I didn't really have an awful. Most of my friends that I knew had moved away, you know, from my hometown, and so there wasn't an awful lot for me there. And so I don't really have anything to go back to, and I don't. I mean, I've got family members there who I go and visit every couple of years, but I don't have an awful lot to go back to, and that's fine by me. You know.
Mm, mm. Do you toy with the idea of, do you think it would be Malaysia, or do you think, because it's interesting you talk about if you have enough money that, you know, makes you able to contribute and sustain yourself, because I was just thinking about that. Like, if you literally want to move somewhere, there has to be the right to stay there. There has to be the, you know, that each government has there has to be a reason
Yeah,
why they're granting us the right to stay. You know, like I'm
yeah.
only in the
I mean,
States because I'm granted the right to stay through my husband. Otherwise, I wouldn't have the right to stay. So, you know, it's things like that. And yet I couldn't just stay indefinitely. So, yeah, so it is an interesting conundrum.
yeah. So, for example, Malaysia's got something called the MM2H. There are other ways that foreigners can stay here temporarily, but MM2H is the Malaysia My Second Home kind of retirement scheme. But they change the parameters for this regularly. It's a bit of a standing joke amongst expats who are trying to find out whether they can stay a few more years. But at the moment, I mean, the figures are. You need to be fairly wealthy, certainly more wealthy than a retiring teacher might be. You need to have, I think it's roughly in the region of an unearned income from abroad of £8,000, so about 10,000 US to 11,000 US per month. And you would need that, and then you would need a very large lump sum as well. So
Mm,
you'd be talking about me needing to be worth um, a million or two. So
mm,
most people are ruled out by that. And I think in Thailand there is a similar sort of scheme. I don't know what the figures are for that, but I'm not sure about other countries whether they've got the same. But Malaysia and Thailand, we said, two very attractive sort of large destinations where retired people might go for a warm climate. That'd be kind of like one of the first attractions of it would be the fantastic climates.
mm,
Um, but you certainly have to be wealthy to
mm.
do it.
And if
Otherwise, or you've got to be working.
or you've got to be working, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mhm.
Where
Mhm.
you're clearly a contribution. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. And if you didn't have to worry about any of these factors, is there a particular country that you would just go, oh, I'd like to retire to there? If there
Oh,
were no barriers of money and la la.
you you're putting me on the spot there. Would I if I could retire anywhere I wanted to? I don't know whether it would be um, Europe or whether it would be possibly Asia. I mean, I think here at the moment it seems to be uh, quite a sort of attractive place. Don't know. I go traveling quite a bit, and I find sort of interesting characters. You know, in Thailand, sort of in the north of Thailand, you might go to um, Chiang Rai or somewhere like that. You might, you know, because lots of these people used to live in Phuket, but now Phuket is just a gigantic holiday resort, and so these characters have moved out of Phuket, and now you find them up in the north of Thailand, and they're you know that's kind of like they're interesting characters. Um, I mean, Malaysia, there are a certain amount of retirees, but they tend to be, I would say, Penang would be the major kind of destination,
Mm,
just because of the climate and the scenery and stuff. I think KL's more for working people.
yes, yes, I could
Apart
imagine
from
that.
that, I don't. I mean, there's I really enjoyed sort of traveling in places like Cambodia and Laos and Vietnam. They're wonderful countries, fascinating places, and they're lovely people.
Mm,
Um, I also I really enjoyed. And I'm a bit of a Sinophile. I really enjoy living in China, and I really enjoyed the company of the people. I think it would be more difficult to stay in China kind of over a long period of time. I think it would be that would be too difficult.
mm,
Um, but yeah, I've not. I've could be a. I mean, could be any number of places I'd have thought, and I don't. I mean, I'd like to. I've still got some traveling in me. I mean, that's another thing. Still got plenty of traveling in me. I've never been to South America, which I'd like to. I'd like to go and have a look at South America, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure whether I'd like it.
mm. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
So, yeah, exactly. You could travel, and not necessarily live. You could travel to explore places. Um,
yeah,
but it's interesting how you've really found your home and been comfortable experiencing living in Asia. And how did that contrast with your experience in Saudi Arabia?
Oh, right. Well, I mean, so when I went to Saudi, I think pretty much before I arrived there, people were warning you about it. I mean, I think it might be quite different now, but certainly in 2007, it was a much more um, sort of, you were in the aftermath of the Gulf War and things like that, and there was a lot of more kind of animosity and sort of you weren't really quite sure of what you got yourself into, and so you arrive in Riyadh, and the school would take away your passport and things like that. And and my school was on the diplomatic compound, which is a big sort of compound with layers of security and big guns everywhere. And we were bused, so we didn't live on the diplomatic compound. We lived in apartments in Riyadh. So we weren't, we were quite in a way quite vulnerable. But after a while, you got used to it, and you got used to how to conduct yourself, and what was expected of you. You had to greet everybody when you got on the Batar bus they called it. If you were going down to Batar to do shopping or whatever, things like that, you should greet everybody in the correct Islamic way, and people people appreciate that. So that's very important that you try and integrate with the local society. So I kind of did that as much as I could. I had one or two close friends, Americans that I worked with, and we shared a joke about kind of like what crazy situation we found ourselves in. But at the same time, when you woke up at 6 o'clock or 5:30 in the morning, and the call to prayers came drifting across the roofs of all the houses of Riyadh. It's kind of like an incredibly evocative place to be. So I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was a hard place uh, to to get used to it. And certainly for my colleagues, it was a hard place to love. But I certainly, if I didn't love it, I certainly have very fond memories of it. You
Mm,
know, uh, just because you were just looking around, and well, I just never imagined I could have actually lived in this exotic kind of exotic place, city in the middle of the desert. Because
mm.
Riyadh is this place you can get in a car, and you're in a city, and you just drive in a straight line. You suddenly the desert will just be in front of you. You will literally drive out into the desert. Riyadh just stops, and the desert begins.
Wow.
You know.
Mm. And would you want to go
So,
back? Are you ever drawn to visiting or not
no,
necessarily working again? No, it's had its
not
time.
yeah, no, it's an experience that's been and gone, I think.
Mm,
Yeah. I
mm,
mean, look, I mean, I say that, but I couldn't really travel. We didn't feel secure enough to travel. And so you couldn't get in a four-wheel drive and go up to the historical kind of relics of Lawrence of Arabia and all this kind of stuff. There was sort of derelict trains and stuff up in the north and things like that. I had kind of Jordanian colleagues and stuff, and I think actually they may have been the ones who said no, don't. I don't think it's really safe for you to go up there. So there were things that you couldn't see in Saudi Arabia that were there. And so you were very much conscious that you couldn't really travel.
mm,
And so perhaps if things change in there, and I think things are sort of changing there
mm.
slowly. It may be possible. Who knows? There may be a tourist route to Saudi Arabia in coming years. I
Mm.
don't know, but
And
um,
you were in Poland for your masters. How long were you
yeah.
there for?
So that was about I would say probably in total about a year and a half. Eventually, I came back after
Mm,
about a year and a half. But I mean, that was in the second city, Poland's second city, Łódź. So again, it was a fantastic experience. Yeah, you didn't know. I mean, again, Poland will have changed a lot in the 20 years since I've been there, 20, 22, 23 years since I've been there. But that's what kind of sort of got me, it flicked a switch in me that I sort of really liked being an outsider. And I honestly, Łódź, Warsaw was destroyed during the Second World War, whereas Łódź was not, and so it's got this fantastic old kind of ambience about it, and like the old Jewish cemeteries there, and that's the things I remember, and the main street down the middle of Łódź, Piotrkowska, I think, and this fantastic. I can't remember now, but this fantastic museum just in the north of Piotrkowska, and it was a history, a city that is just full of history, and it's incredibly picturesque. If you go to Łódź at night in the snow, is the most fantastic, evocative memory I have in my head of living and studying there. It's
mm.
a beautiful place, and so yeah, that's what I remember about doing my master's in Łódź. Yeah,
Mm. And were you studying in English, or did you have to learn Polish?
yeah. Oh,
No.
uh, no, I didn't because I think I was the last ever student to get this scholarship where I studied film at the film school there, which is in Łódź, and the way it worked was most students went there, and international students from Europe and the States would go there to study. And your first year there, as I recall, you had to learn Polish. So you had 1 year to get your Polish from 0 to 60, and you had basically a year to do it. It's intensive. So I joined the language class for about 3 months, and I just got myself kind of just in a little bit of shape so I could survive. And because the film I made there I was working with children, and they didn't speak English, so even though one or two of the crew I was working with spoke English, you were working in Polish.
Mm.
So I just about got enough to survive, um, and, and got through. So I had to learn some Polish, just enough to get by.
Mm.
Um,
And
but most of the students who were there for 4 years, they have to spend a year, and then their classes are in Polish.
right. Wow. Wow. Well, you've
Mm.
definitely had a very interesting. How many years is it that you've been not living in
Since
the UK?
since 2007. So what are we on now? So that would
Oh
be
yeah.
yeah,
So
16, 17 years.
yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, a very interesting long chapter of life being lived, literally of your own
Yeah,
creation.
that's right, and more to go, more to go.
And more
I'm
to
not
go,
finished yet.
exactly. No, exactly. You're
Yeah.
enjoying it, and it's amazing. And
Mm.
it all started with Paris or Poland
Yeah,
indirectly.
yeah. I'd say it started in Poland.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm not sure. I
amazing.
did. Yeah, Paris. Paris is. I mean, Paris is great to be a tourist. I don't think. I mean, another sort of great place, but it's certainly kind of. I mean, actually, because it's quite the centre of it's quite small, so you can actually pretty much walk around it in a I don't know in a day. I don't know if you, but yeah, you can pretty much walk anywhere. I certainly walked home from the centre of Paris on a number of occasions.
Mm.
It has its charms.
And did you pick up a bit of French while you were there, or you already
Not
spoke
really.
it?
A little bit. I mean, a little
Mm,
bit to get by. To get
mm,
by. You know. Um, yeah. Not really.
mm. But it doesn't sound like you've been hampered linguistically at all. I mean, I know for sure in Malaysia, um, English is, spoken. So in Malaysia,
Mm.
but even in the other countries, it sounds like with a smattering of the language that you had, French, Polish, and in China, a bit of Chinese, you've got by. You've still experienced like you've
Yeah.
got involved in life quite fully.
Yeah. You can uh, with a little bit. You're right. With a little bit of language, it's enough for people to sort of understand that you're having a go. They appreciate that you're having a go. Certainly in Mandarin and Polish, they'd smile when you sort of chit chat with them a bit. But they're often you find sort of certainly in China, they're much prouder of their superior English speaking skills, and so as soon as they find that you're English, they'll want to switch into English, and unless you're good in Mandarin, you're going to have to switch with them
Mm,
because you'll be able to see the expression on their face, and it's going to be they're looking at you and saying this is going to be slow for us if we don't jump into English. But I have a go in Mandarin, and I still have
mm.
a lesson every week. I still have my Mandarin lesson every week down at the Buddhist free school in Georgetown.
That's
So
fantastic.
yeah, well, you have lots of people for the Huaren, the Chinese cultural group in Malaysia. Often they will speak fantastic Mandarin, but they often don't read it very well, and so you can find yourself a class where you'll find often senior kind of Chinese Malaysian um, people who are taking a Mandarin lesson,
Mm,
usually to do with reading.
mm,
So which I still do every week. So
mm.
it's
That's great because it's also a really
yeah,
lovely way of meeting people. You know,
yeah, yeah,
it,
yeah,
when you
absolutely.
talked about integration earlier, and do you find you live quite an integrated life? Is it, or is it a bit of both? Because of,
I most of your time, I mean, your work. If you work at these international schools, they keep you busy. So
mm,
it's hard work, and you have very little spare time. And so, apart from weekends, where you might travel, um, you 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 don't have an awful lot of spare time to go out, kind of socializing and things like that. I mean, I do my hobby is yoga, so I do yoga 2 or 3 times a week. Most of the people I do it with, well, actually, I do one class which is with a Chinese group, and I do one which is with a sort of expat group, and then the third one's don't know what that one is, but yes. So I do, yeah. Through your hobbies and things like that, you do get to meet the locals. The art to living in this kind of way is don't get too stuck in the expat in an expat social group, because you'll certainly find some very nice people to go and have. The Westerners love to have gin and tonic. on their balconies and this sort of, or on the sun deck, that kind of thing. You'll find nice people to do that with, but it really is kind of like it's going to be a bit of a cul-de-sac, I think. So I sort of avoid that a little bit.
Yeah, I do. It's nice to be able to be in a country and as able as one is, job permitting and society permitting or whatever, be part of whatever's going on, to whatever degree. So it sounds like you've created quite a nice balance of that through the hobbies and through maintaining your Mandarin, and yet you still get to have a gin and tonic on occasion. You know what I mean? It's like
Very
a nice,
occasionally.
it's like a nice mix.
Yeah, exactly. Because if I was back in the UK, I'd be, I wouldn't be I wouldn't even want a gin and tonic. You just want, stiff whiskey. That'd be the only thing that in the north of England that sort of make you feel any better. But I mean that's the other thing in Malaysia is things like if you enjoy a drink every now and again, it's quite expensive. It's very heavily taxed in a way that things, it's quite expensive in a way that things in the UK and Europe probably are a bit cheaper, and even cheaper in the States. The consumption taxes in Malaysia tend to be quite high. So certainly things like alcohol, they're available, but they're quite expensive.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Interesting.
So you have to ration. You have to ration yourself.
Exactly.
It keeps you healthy.
Well, yeah, and you do yoga, so
that's right. Keeps you off the bottle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So amazing.
But the other day, my yoga teacher who is the most demanding yoga class I've ever done. It's quite tough. And at the end of class, she suddenly said, "Pijiao." She said to everybody, "Right, pijiao," which in Mandarin is beer. She was saying to everybody, "Right, let's have a beer," which I couldn't believe, which she'd never done before.
Wow. And did she bring it all?
No, she didn't. No, I said I can't. I've left us in too much of a state. Her class is really grueling.
Right.
Her and her friends, I believe, stayed and drank beer in her back garden. I was too broken.
Well, thank you. I'm really happy that you've shared your experiences and brought to life for the listeners and also for me, because I loved visiting KL and I always wished to go to Penang, and and China was my home, but so many years ago. It's lovely to hear it through your eyes and your much longer, deeper experience. So yeah, thank you very much for sharing everything.
Right, thank you. I enjoyed it.